good morning, everyone. So today I'm going to be talking about trying to roughly go over turning your students into confident communicators. So I'll be talking about speaking and kind of how to practice it in your lessons and in your classroom, in your classroom a bit. All right. So today our agenda. To start with, I'm going to talk about the 4 skills. And I'll roughly go over how they all kind of intertwine and what they are, just kind of briefly. And then going into what is speaking, and kind of similar to the layout last week of speaking activities and how to teach it. Okay? So let's get started with the 4 skills. So what are the 4 skills? What are the 4 skills? So I'm going to try to be more interactive with you guys this morning, as I usually try to do. So a lot of times I'll ask some questions and then give a bit of time. And if you guys can answer in the chat, please do. So what are the 4 skills? So this one should be, as teachers, we should know 4 skills here. So the first one, what I will be mostly going over today, speaking, followed by writing, reading, and listening. Okay, so these are our 4 skills that we kind of focus on throughout all of our lessons and our teaching. All right. So let's ask some questions. So I'll post some questions to you guys in the chat. Which skill do people use the most on a daily basis? Okay. So we have the 4 skills. Which ones do we use the most? Okay. So I want to see maybe writing your opinion in the chat. So we'll start from the least used skill. So what do you think is the least used? So what comes last? What is the last place? What will come in fourth? So we have listening. Okay. So what is the least used skill? So percentage. Okay. So we have listening, something speaking, writing, okay. Another speaking. What is our least used skill? Get a few more guesses in there. What is speaking? Writing, okay. Listening, speaking. That's your order, so it goes. Is that from most used to least used, Wendy? So going from number 1, listening, speaking, reading, writing. Okay. So let's see. So what is the least used? Okay, so a lot of good guesses. There is the correct answer in there. So the least used skill on a daily basis is writing. So writing at 9%. So we don't write as much throughout our days. Okay? So following writing is reading. So a lot of reading and writing, not as much throughout our day. And then coming in second place is speaking. So 30% of our day usually is speaking, and that means the majority of our day is used listening. Okay, so used listening. So this is kind of the layout for our 4 skills that we use, on a daily basis. All right. So listening and then speaking are the top 2. Now that we have that, as a learner, so when you learned English, or just put yourselves in the view of your students, what do you think is the most difficult skill to learn for yourself? What is the most difficult skill? So it doesn't have to be English. Say you learned a different language. What was kind of the most difficult skill to be able to learn? Writing. Yeah, writing can, depending on the language, writing can be quite a difficult skill to pick up. Because a lot of alphabets are different in different languages. Yeah, a lot of writing. Writing is very difficult to learn. Yeah, for me, kind of speaking. Speaking was a little bit more difficult for me. Speaking and listening, actually. And get the communicative skills. Okay, so good. Okay, so writing seems to be an overwhelming difficult skill to learn. And then as a teacher, what are your guys' favorite skills to teach? what do you enjoy teaching? Like out of the four skills, what's the top skill that you'd like to learn or you like to teach? Reading? Yeah, a lot of reading games. One of my past um, past webinars I talked about reading, some activities and games. Speaking. Yeah, speaking. A lot of fun speaking games. And a lot of kind of activities that can go well with speaking. Yeah. What I'm not saying is with writing being the most difficult, thinking it most difficult. Of course, I think it might be the least favorite to teach. I haven't seen anyone say writing yet. Okay. All right, so that's kind of your favorite skill to teach. And then, what is the most difficult skill to teach? I can probably guess would be writing for most people. Writing and grammar, maybe. Writing kind of goes hand in hand with grammar. What is the most difficult skill to teach? Yeah, just for in my experience, writing was going to be the most difficult because students don't like to write. When they hear writing or like hear, whenever I would say to my students to take out their notebooks, they know that writing was coming. So it's kind of a little bit difficult. All right. So now let's talk about the input and output skills. Okay, so input is what the students is expected to learn, and then the outcome of what the students has learned. Okay, what the student has learned. So again, I'm going to ask this question to the chat. What what are the input skills? What skills are the input skills? So out of reading, writing, listening, and speaking, which are the input skills? So I'll give you a hint. There's two. There's two input skills and then our two output skills. So which ones are input? What do you think the input skills are? Input, listening, and reading. Okay. Listening is input, listening. Output, speaking, and writing. Okay. So it's input. Good. So Lydia has hit the nail on the head there. Okay. So our input skills are reading and listening, and then our output skills are speaking and writing. Okay. So as you can see in my little kind of diagram here, so we have reading and listening goes in, speaking and writing goes out. What happens in the middle? What happens in the middle? So once we take in the input, what happens here to produce the output? So kind of a one word thing that we do. What happens when we get the input into our brain? Thinking, okay? So after thinking about it, we try to do what before speaking and writing? Give you a hint, it starts with the letter C. Any guesses? It's kind of a long word. Connection, that's a good guess. Communicate, another good guess. It's close. So actually what happens in the middle is, see if anyone can get it before I go into it, comprehension. Okay, so we get the input and then we kind of comprehend what we've listened to, what we've read, and then we can produce. We can use our output skills to produce something. So what happens in the middle is we're comprehending the input that we're putting in, or that we're getting. Okay, so let's kind of think about this. So I'll give you kind of different scenarios, different situations, and I want you to think about what skills we're using, okay, whether it be input or output. All right. So the first one here, you write a postcard to your friend. Is that an input skill or an output skill? So you're writing a postcard to your friend. Input or output? Output. Very good. So we talked about earlier, writing is one of our output skills. So it is an output skill. Okay. Next one here, you watch your favorite movie. Is that an input or an output skill? Very good. Very good. So input. So when you're watching a movie, you're listening, doing a lot of listening, and depending if you have subtitles, you can do a bit of reading at the same time. Okay. You tell your friend a funny story. Input, output. Output. Perfect. Okay. You guys are doing great. And you read a dramatic news article. So keyword here, you're looking at reading. You read a dramatic news article. So that is input. Very good. Then next one here. You have a conversation with your mom. Have a conversation with your mom. This one I'm getting a little tricky here. Lydia's caught on. So the key word in this sentence is conversation. Conversation. So this one here is both. Is both. So when you have a conversation, you're listening to the person as well as speaking. Okay? So listening and speaking. So it's both. Okay? So input and output. And the last one here, you attend Gary's webinar, which I hope for everyone is going to be both. Okay? For those of you writing in chat, it's both. So make sure that you can you are writing out, so that's your output skill, and then you're also kind of reading and listening to my presentation here. Okay, so that's kind of going over the 4 skills, both input and output. It's like everyone's guessed it correctly. You all get a gold star. Alright, so let's get into the main topic today, speaking. So a lot of times, in my experience, the students are pretty afraid to speak. Maybe a few students out of the whole class will be very confident speakers or are just kind of outgoing speakers. Okay? So the fear of speaking. Let's look at this. So when using English, are you scared to speak, and are you a shy speaker, English speaker? So you can kind of apply this to any language. So I'm just kind of asking you guys, in your personal experience when you guys were learning English or practicing English, what kind of personality did you have as a learner? Were you okay with speaking, or were you a bit shy when you kind of had to speak English with somebody or in front of, say, your class? What were some of your guys' experience while learning English? Very shy? Yeah, I think shy is kind of is a bit of the natural feeling when you're learning a language. unless you're really eager to practice. Okay? And then it's kind of some other questions. Why do you think language learners fear speaking? Why do we feel shy? Why do our students feel shy to speak? So these are some things we kind of, to be able to teach, we have to kind of think about, think about as learners, just as learners, what would be holding our students back from being able to speak and speak confidently at the same time. So afraid of making mistakes? Absolutely. I think that would probably be the number one answer. Okay? Sometimes they don't understand how to start. Yeah. And a lot of times speaking can, or not being able to speak can be, coming from the other skills as well. So yeah, they're afraid to be laughed at. Yeah. The motivation might not be there, worried about pronunciation. Yeah, so there's a lot of things that we kind of have to think about and harness in our students to like be able to be confident speakers. All right. So I think there are two types of speakers. Yeah, lack of confidence. So there's the overthinker. These are the ones that are worried about making mistakes. Their pronunciation might not be the best, or maybe they're not confident in their grammar. Okay, so these are the kind of things that happen for an overthinker. And then the underthinkers are the ones that just they're the ones in class that are so eager to speak. They don't care about if they make any mistakes and they speak more freely. And I feel like the underthinkers, there's a time and place for them, but they, more often than not, those are the type of speakers we want to kind of build up to and try to like get them to be. Because even though underthinkers aren't worried about mistakes and say they make mistakes, those are opportunities in class for them to be able to learn something. So if they make a mistake, they're able to learn and progress in their learning. Okay? So a lot of times, for me, an example, when I kind of learned Korean, I was an overthinker. I would keep my sentences very short to phrases that I've already always used, grammar structures that I always used, and never really tried to test myself with higher level grammar points or sentences. But eventually, over time, I became an underthinker and just there are still sometimes when you can get a little bit worried that they don't understand you, but it's all about practice, and practice is a very important thing, and I'll talk about that soon. Okay, so those are the two types, and now going into what is speaking, and as well in my title today, communicators. What is communicating? What communicating is? Okay, so asking you guys, is speaking and communicating the same, and how are they different? So speaking and communicating, are they two words that mean the same thing, or is there some kind of difference between them? So asking you guys, what do you think? Let's get those output skills working. What do you think? So we have speaking and communicating. Are they the same? Are they different? Speaking is easy, communicating is hard. Yeah, yep, and there's truth to that. Communicating means you have to understand what the other person said. Good. Speaking could be one way, but communicating is both ways. Good, solid answers. Good. Okay. So when we talk about speaking, like we talked about, speaking could be one way. So speaking just focuses on fluency. It's one skill. So we only focus on one skill of speaking. So when speaking, you can, there's times where people have to practice their speech and they just speak in front of a mirror. They speak to themselves. Yeah? Or they just talk. Yeah, so it's one skill. And then communicating, we bring in another skill. So we talk about listening and speaking at the same time. So like Babel said, you kind of comprehend and understand what the other person's saying, and then you continually go back and forth in communicating with each other. Okay? And communicating more oftentimes is more personalized and meaningful. So when you're communicating with someone, there's a bit more meaning behind it. And communicating, the ultimate goal is the language as a whole. All right. Okay. So now that we got that gone over that. So fluency. So I talked when speaking, you kind of focus on fluency. So fluency is using the language efficiently, but that doesn't mean that you are perfect. Yeah. There are times where there will be mistakes. Okay? So it's just becoming more comfortable with the language. So if you're trying to just become more fluent and only focusing on your speaking, then talking in the mirror or just practicing by yourself can be an effective way. But if you want to actually master the language, then you need to become more of a communicator. So between a speaker and a communicator. And why is it important? So you start with a fluency practice. So like I talked about, just practicing to speak. And once that happens, you kind of become more confident with the language. So like I said in my definition, kind of becoming more comfortable leads to being a bit more confident as well. Okay? And that would lead to more motivation. So obviously becoming more confident in the language will lead to more motivation, and it kind of goes in a bit of a cycle where you can continue learning and you feel confident in being able to learn more. Okay? All right. So let's talk about the communicative approach. All right. So in class, so now we're trying to go more into speaking in the classroom. So I've talked about a little more general things, but now we're going into more teaching speaking. All right. So these are some approaches we want to take into the classroom to utilize the speaking time. So I've briefly talked about this in previous webinars. We want to increase student talk and decrease teacher talk. So a lot of times, we can, as teachers, spend 20 to 25 minutes, almost over half the class, instructing the students, rather than giving them the opportunity to actually practice together. So like explaining the grammar points, explaining the vocabulary, giving them instructions. That is kind of one way. So the students aren't really getting the communication side. So we try to give more activities for the students to talk together, rather than, as teachers, it also gives teachers a break as well in these kinds of speaking lessons. All right. Next, using games and activities. So a lot of group games or group activities are a good way to take numbers 1 and 2 together to increase the student talk, as well as having a student-teacher talk, having the students kind of lead the talking rather than the teacher, and the teacher taking more of a facilitator role in the classroom. Okay, so using the games and activities. Role plays are really big as well. I've done a lot of role plays throughout my time of teaching, and you can get really creative with it. So maybe sometimes your students can make props, or have them be able to use costumes to do these role plays, or have them assigned certain roles. So it's just a different way to practice in the classroom. All right. And another thing, so just like with maybe writing a speech or anything, it's quite a good idea to start with writing and then work into speaking. Especially when it comes to sometimes with communication as well. It helps when people want to bring up something to kind of write down their thoughts first. So when they do come in to communicate what they want to say, they already have it in their mind, as opposed to, calling on a student and having them stand up in front of the class and then ask them a question. Depending on that student, they might just kind of freeze in place. And, there's a lot of times they can just kind of have a mental block. So if you give the students time and ask them a few questions, and then in their notebook they can write out their answers, and then have the time for the students to talk or to speak, it might be a bit more, you might find a bit more success in doing that. Because with that practice of writing and having them prepare what to say, excuse me, and they'll be more confident. So you can even have the students practice together, so increasing the student talk. So if you had them ask them a question and then they write down their answer, you can have them practice with a partner and then practice as a class. So there's different steps that you can take as a teacher to kind of get your students more comfortable with speaking through the other skills. Okay. And the last one here, practice. Practice, practice, practice. Okay. So just like I talked about in my previous example with the writing, they can practice down what they want to say, practice to write down what they want to say. They can practice it by themselves. They can practice it with a partner and practice it as a class. So there's different ways to practice, and kind of go over these different ways more and more as we go through today. All right? So the main focus, of course, is for the students to use the language. And like I've talked about in my listening webinar last week, if you haven't seen that, tapping into the students' background knowledge and then personalizing and making it meaningful. Okay, so a lot of times, just in the learning process in general, if a student can connect more personally with the topic or with some vocabulary structures, sentences, they're more likely to remember the sentences, okay, or remember what they learned and what they practiced. All right. So example here. So what I talk about, controlled input leads to confident output. Okay. So controlled input meaning that we don't try to do too much with our students. Most of the time there is maybe a key question and a key sentence expression that they need to practice. And, as long as we keep it to kind of that minimum, instead of, throwing 10 sentences that they need to memorize, if we throw that many, maybe they're not going to remember. But as opposed to keeping the structure of, one sentence, but then having different vocabulary that you can interchange, can lead to more confident output for the students. Okay, so kind of example here. So the question is, what are you going to do this weekend? And then he or she or I'm going to, and then you fill in the blank there. Okay. So with the speaking process, we start with the motivation, like I talked about. So building interest in the topic for the students. Then, as I referred to earlier, the comprehensible input. Okay. So you prepare the students for what they're going to learn, build some interest in what the topic is, and then kind of present the input in a kind of simple way, for the students to be able to understand. When the students get the input, you don't want to use too much explanation. Because sometimes when you try to explain the input too much, it can get lost. Like the main point could become lost in that explanation. All right? And then the fluency, so this is the practice. So they get the input, and then kind of, through the fluency, they're practicing their comprehension and then their practice. And then the communicative phase, where they're able to have the conversation or communicate with a partner, with the group, or the class. So these are kind of the four kind of main steps of the process for speaking. All right? So let's go into this a bit more deeply. Is there any questions so far before I start? I hope I haven't been speaking too quickly for you guys. I know it's been a bit since I've kind of checked in on you. So is everything kind of clear so far before I move on, or is there any questions that I can answer before I get too far in here? So please let me know before I move on into some of these main points of the speaking process, as well as some activities. So I'll be going into some activities as well. So thanks for the roses, everyone. Okay. So is everything okay? Everything's good? You can take those flowers as a good sign that everything is okay. There's a bit of delay, so okay. Yeah, and if you ever have any questions throughout the webinar, please put them in the chat, and I can try to answer them for you towards the end as well. Okay, so let's go over the speaking process. All right. So starting with motivation. So similar to what I referred to in my listening webinar, kind of a similar layout here with motivation. It's all about tapping into the student's background knowledge and building interest in the lesson. So having them look at this picture, doing picture walks, asking them questions about the about what they see, anything to kind of draw them into the picture, and then you can, from the motivation, you can kind of transition into what the students will be learning for the lesson. So you can also, in the motivation step, you can kind of do predictions, so the students can guess what they will be learning as well, based on what they see in the picture. All right? So, like I talked about here, these are all the steps that I basically talked about with that picture. So building interest, talking about the topics, background knowledge, and making predictions. Okay? So that's the motivation phase. Now the comprehensible input. So we talked about building the interest in, and then talk about how you present the topic, or present the key expressions for the lesson. Okay? So usually how I would present the input for the students, I usually have a PPT with some pictures and kind of introduce the sentences to the students. It's kind of similar here in the book. They show a picture, but with the underlined parts that you can kind of interchange with other vocabulary. Okay, so an important thing with comprehensible inputs, you can kind of present any kind of topic. Okay, so we have a lot of these kind of interesting concepts. Okay, a lot of different, more difficult concepts, and depending on if you know, if you can present it in a more comprehensible way, kind of a simple way, with key grammar, key vocabulary, you can probably get there to present the input to the students. Okay? So kind of the simple vocabulary that goes into each topic. Okay? So even if it's unfamiliar to them, if you're going to introduce it that way, kind of key in on the vocabulary and the grammar, okay, of the topic, essentially. Right? And then fluency. So there's a lot of different ways to practice fluency that I've gone over. So talking about role plays, we've talked about games, group activities. So there's a lot of different ways to practice fluency, and this is, again, reviewing, fluency is just getting them comfortable with the language, okay? Getting them to use the language. Whether or not they make the mistakes isn't the key point, it's them just being able to use the language. Alright? So, like I talked about, practice, practice, practice. There's a lot of things that we can kind of achieve through practice with speaking. Okay, so here's an example of a speaking game, or speaking activity, I should say, not really a game. So this is again promoting the student talk. So you get the students into pairs, and kind of give them an emotion, give them a feeling that they have to practice in. So again, we're not focusing too much on, like being, a native speaker. Like we're just practicing in a kind of a fun way. So you can and they will speak in that feeling. Okay. So example, you could give your students sad and tired. Okay? Sad and tired. And then when they get their practice, so here you can do the question and answers, and they can go through each one. Or if you see on the bottom of the page, they can create their own answers. But they have to speak in these feelings. So what you could do, you can maybe make cards, different cards with different feelings, and each student can pick their own feeling out of a bag. And then they will practice with their partner using that feeling. Okay? So it's instead of just normal practice, they're also practicing, different feelings as different feelings and ways to say the same sentences. Okay? So you can do angry and happy, and they can also do the same question and answer. So maybe the first round they do practice 1, and then the second round they do new feelings for practice 2. Okay, so that one's kind of an emotional speaking game. Okay, and then some other kind of simple speaking activities. Look and say. So here I have the vocabulary for this topic, and you call out the numbers. Just call out the numbers, and then they have to speak. They have to say what the vocabulary words are. So if I said number 2, the students would say go camping. If I said number 5, go to art museums. And then you can kind of continue doing it. Maybe say multiple numbers, and the students kind of have to follow where you're going. Okay. So yeah. And then some more fluency practice. Look and disappear. Kind of simple one here. So you just present the vocabulary, present the pictures. You can also have the students say the sentence. Make sure they speak it in a sentence rather than just saying the words. So this one here, if one went away, I'm going to go to art museums. So they can use the sentence rather than just the vocabulary. Okay, and then you can keep going through, and then maybe take 2 out at a time, and then go through that. Okay, so that's another simple speaking activity. And then some more fluency practice, more practice here. Just giving them different amounts of time to practice or to talk about a subject. So this one's more, again, communication. So you can choose different subjects and give the students different amount of time. So here, give them 30 seconds, 20 seconds, and 10 seconds. So each amount of time is given for a different topic. Okay. So example here, if you were going to use the book, so you can give number 1, what my hobby is. You can give them maybe, that one maybe be like a 10-second one. For how I got started, 20 seconds. You can talk about it. What is special about my hobby? 30 seconds. So just giving them a time limit and, having that little bit of structure in the activity and how much they'll speak and communicate, talk with their partner. All right? Any questions so far about these activities? Kind of going a bit quick, so going into communicative. So if you have any questions about these activities, feel free to leave them in the chat, and I can kind of clarify some things for you if I went too fast. Just trying to make sure that you guys are understanding what I'm saying, presenting to you guys. All right? So communicative. So this was the last one here. So we went over fluency, and now how to communicate. So communicate, we talked about listening and speaking. Okay. So yeah, the activities are going to be more integrated. So multiple skills will be involved. So maybe it might not be, some activities won't be limited to just speaking and listening. But again, communication, listening and speaking are the main points. So a lot of these, this is where more personalization comes in, as well as more task-based. An example in here, I'm going to be talking about like a survey, for example. Okay. So in the class survey, you can either, as a teacher, make your own handout for the students, and then you can have them walk around and survey their class, asking different questions, fill in the boxes. Okay, so maybe something like this. So their goal is to ask the same question to 4 different students, and then they keep going through and they can fill in their table. Okay, so now I want to kind of survey everyone here today, everyone in the chat. So I'm going to ask a few questions for you guys, and I want to see what you guys have done. So my key question here that I'm practicing is, have you ever? Have you ever? So now I want to ask the chat, have you ever traveled to Europe? Has anyone in the chat traveled to Europe? If yes, tell me what country. What country have you been to? So if there's anyone in here that's been to Europe. You can also tell me no. Doesn't have to be yes. Germany and England, nice. I've also been to Germany. I've been to a few European countries. Germany, France, Spain, Italy, Netherlands. Been to 5. Anyone else? How many travelers today? Been to 5 different ones. Nice. Italy. My favorite was Spain. I want to go back to Spain. Okay. So not too many have been to Europe. Okay. Maybe people are catching up. Yeah, when the crisis is over, we can get back to traveling. The food in Spain is great. Very delicious. Okay. Okay. And the next one here. So here's another question. Have you ever met anyone famous? Anyone ever meet anyone famous? Anyone famous? Yes. Were they an actress or a singer or actor? Sports star? What were they famous for, Lydia? Oh, a writer. Nice. How about you, Kelly? Oh, an actor. I was expecting that answer at some point. Thanks, Sue. Singer name. Oh, a singer. Nice. I've met a famous Korean comedian before. Played tennis with him. Kang Ho-dong. I met Kang Ho-dong before. Maybe 3 or 4 years ago now. And so I think there were some other Korean variety stars there as well. Okay, next question here. Hopefully there's more yeses here. Have you ever hiked up a mountain? Anyone in here enjoy hiking? I packed up a few in Korea. I can't read that. Okay. Alright. I hope to be able to hike up somewhere in China next, whenever this is all over, when I get back there at some point. Okay. And then, last one here. Have you ever learned more than 2 languages? So I know a lot of us know English and your kind of native native language. Is there any other language that you know outside of those two? Do I speak some Chinese? Not yet. Chinese is on my list of languages to learn. Ooh, English and Japanese. Nice. Japanese. Yeah, I'm trying to learn. My goal is to learn like 5 languages eventually. Okay. Good. Multi-language people. It's very good. Okay. So these are also some examples of different surveys that you can do from the book. Okay. So just having, so if the students say they have problems with creating their own questions, there's other ways. You know, you can give the students the questions to ask to other students in the class, and they just have to write down their answers. Okay, simply like this. And then some other fluency practices and obviously communicative practices. Information gap, doing an information gap. So like I talked about, a lot of this other skills can come in. It doesn't just have to be listening and speaking. So information gap, what this is, so the students, so you would have one student as a writer, so this person on the right will be a writer. The student in the middle will be kind of the communicator, essentially. So they'll say you can post like a paper or some kind of dialogue script up on the board. And what the student will do is they will run, hopefully not run too fast, but go up to the board, read something, and then go back to the student that's writing and communicate what they read, what they saw. So it kind of encompasses all 4 skills, essentially. Okay. So the student that's sitting down here will be practicing the listening, and listening, maybe speaking and writing. The student running will be reading, speaking, and reading and speaking mostly, and listening, depending on if they're asking each other questions. Okay? So just like this, say on their worksheet, they had these sentences here, but there were some blanks. So the student would run up, read the sentence, go back to the other student, and say the sentence to them, and they would fill in. Okay, so that's kind of a simple information gap. We can do a similar activity as information gap, but more of a relay race. Okay, more of a relay. So each student will have a role. There's a runner, a reader, a writer, and you can make it a bit of a challenge. Okay, so this is a group challenge. So kind of the same. So you can give a sentence here. The student can read the sentence to the other student or to the runner. The runner listens, goes back to the writer, and speaks to that student. That student will listen and write down. So it's kind of similar to information gap, but adding an extra little element into the activity. Right? So here's kind of a more general example here, more visual example. So you have the reader who will either, you can either do sentences or you can do vocabulary, and one student will go back and forth. Okay? You can also do some other speaking activities with kind of spot the difference. So of course you have 2 pieces of paper, or two worksheets, but you give one of the worksheets to that student or to one student, and the other worksheet that has the differences to another student. And they kind of have to communicate with each other, asking each other questions about their picture and trying to find out what the differences are. Okay? And you can actually time them as well if you want to give it a little more challenge. Okay? So like this, spot the difference. Who can see what the differences are in here? So normally you would cut it in half and give one to each of the students, and then kind of have them ask questions to each other. So it's a good way to say how many, or what are they wearing. Okay. So what kind of differences can you see in here? What differences do you see? 1, 2, 3, 4. So I see about 6 differences. The number of ducks, very good. So there's 4 on the left side, 3 on the right side. Leaves on the tree, very good. 7. Actually, that's the one I didn't notice. So there's about 7 now. The number of chickens, good. So actually the hen is missing. Yeah, the number of the chicks. Yeah, one of the chicks was the hen before. Child's clothes, very good. Time of the day, good. The sun setting, sunrise. Yeah, and the shoes, yeah, clothes and shoes. So I think there's about 2 more that I haven't seen in the chat yet. Give me like 30 seconds. So I'll go ahead and say it. The door on the barn is over here, and it moves over here. And then the way the duck is facing. So this one's facing left, this one's facing right. So those are the other differences in there. And if you want to get really technical, there's a line here on this goat, or this lamb. And also over here it's missing. So it looks a little bit different, but yeah. Okay. But I think that's just in the case of the drawing. Yeah, the direction of the 2 ducks. And then the door. Okay. Very good. So you kind of do a lot of more question and answer with this kind of activity. Okay. And then kind of the last activity that I have for you guys today, again, is more of a speaking and answering with the students. You can do a bit of a guessing game with the students. If you're doing with vocabulary, you can have the student take a vocabulary word, and what the other students have to do is ask questions to the main student to be able to figure out what the word is or who the person is. Okay, so you can kind of play a guessing game with them using questions. Okay, so kind of running out a bit of a time today. I was going to try to play it with you guys, but just like here, so guess what? If say the answer was a tennis racket, so some of the questions that would start, can you use it playing a sport? That would kind of narrow the questions down. And the key thing is the questions can only be a yes or no answer. So the person at the front cannot answer in any sentences. They just say yes or no. So then eventually, if they kind of narrow it down and they say, is it a tennis racket? Yes, it is. Okay? And then the same with a guess who. They can ask, is it a girl? Is it a boy? Okay. And then they can say yes or no. And then kind of answer here. I was going to play with you guys and see if you could have guessed me. But yeah, so that's kind of a guess who game that you can do as well. This guess who game would be good if you wanted to say pick the students. So the students, give each for like the main word, you can give them a student instead of say someone famous, and then you kind of they have to guess who it is in the class. Okay. So just to review, so the main things for today, the speaking process. So we can't just skip around. We can't practice fluency without comprehensible input, and building the interest for the students into the lesson is very important. So taking these step by step in the speaking process is very important for being able to kind of run a speaking lesson, speaking class. Okay. And then the communicative approach, kind of again the main points that you need to think about in your lesson. Try to promote more student talk. Okay? Give yourself a break sometimes. Give the students some group work or partner work that it gives you the opportunity to also check on them and be able to give them feedback during each of these activities. So the more student talk that they're doing, that they're working together, you can go around your class and also check in on whether they really fully comprehended the input, and then kind of help them a little bit more on a kind of one-to-one basis in picking the actual picking out the problems for them to help them. All right. And then using the games and activities. So I gave a few activities and games today that you can use. Doing role plays in class. So yeah, you can get scripts using books and everything. You can so the students don't have to make their own scripts. And then practicing maybe writing before speaking. So getting them a bit more prepared and confident in what they're going to say by writing it ahead of time. And of course, like I've said a lot, practice, practice, practice. So practicing just leads to better fluency, becoming more comfortable with the language. All right. So that's what I have for you guys today. If you guys have any questions regarding my presentation, my webinar today, or you have any other questions that maybe about your teaching or about about teaching, feel free to send me an email. We'll be very happy to answer any of your questions. So my email is right here. And please follow us on WeChat, and the QR code on the left here is a survey, just to get some feedback on how these webinars are. So please fill those out, and I'll be sticking around for a little bit. So if you have any questions, feel free to leave the question in the chat, and I can answer them for you guys. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your day, out of your morning, to be here for this webinar, and I hope that I was able to help you a bit in preparing to help your students become better communicators and better speakers. So a lot of these activities you can do, given the times. If you're doing online classes, a lot of these activities you can do online as well. They translate well from in the classroom into the online setting. So these are some things that you can do even now. All right. So I'll be around here for a few minutes. So if you have any questions, feel free. If not, thank you again so much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and have a great week. Okay. So thank you, Kelly, and me. Thank you, guys. Thank you. With the percentages, Sky? The one that I have like the percentages we use each day? Or on a daily basis? Alright. Yep, I can go back to that page for you. Thank you guys so much. Glad I could be a help to all of you. Here we go. Here's the page. Here's this guy. And so we do about 45% listening throughout the day. And a lot of that, maybe isn't active listening. We just hear people talking at the cafe, or we hear music playing, we hear the news on the TV. Just a lot of different sources of listening, usually. You're welcome. Happy days to all of you. You're welcome. You're welcome. Just gonna flash my email one more time for the people still here. So yeah, if you have any questions, I'll be signing off here. So here's my email. If there's any questions, again, please feel free to contact me. And I hope to see you all soon. And I hope you guys are all safe and all your loved ones are safe. And I hope you have a great week. All right? So thank you guys. See you next time.